Liar. That single word hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. It echoed through the classroom louder than the school bell, louder than anything he'd ever heard. The students froze for a second, then burst into laughter. Marcus, an 11-year-old boy with big brown eyes and dreams bigger than the sky, stood frozen in front of his classmates. His small hands gripped the edges of the podium, his voice trembling as he tried to finish his sentence. Moments earlier, he had been so excited. It was career day, his favorite day of the year. Each student was called up to the front of the class to talk about what their parents did for a living. His friends bragged about their parents being nurses, mechanics, and shop owners. They received polite claps, nods of approval, and encouraging words from the teacher. When it was finally his turn, Marcus took a deep breath. His father had told him the night before, "Son, be proud of what I do. Speak with confidence." So, he stood tall, smiled, and said the words he was so proud of. "My dad works at the Pentagon." At first, there was silence. You could hear a pin drop. The kids exchanged confused looks. Then, the teacher, Mrs. Whitaker, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, let out a laugh. "Really, Marcus?" "The Pentagon," she said, tilting her head with a mocking smile. "You expect us to believe that? Next, you'll say he's the president." The class erupted. Laughter filled the room like a storm, cruel and unstoppable. Some kids slapped their desks, others pointed at him. Marcus felt his cheeks burn red. He tried to speak over the noise, his voice cracking. "It's true. He's—" But before he could finish, Mrs. Whitaker raised her hand and cut him off. "Enough with the tall tales. We don't make up stories for attention here. Be honest, Marcus. What does your dad really do?" The laughter got louder. Even the kids Marcus thought were his friends, kids he had played basketball with, kids he had shared snacks with, joined in. One boy in the back shouted, "Yeah, Marcus. What is he, a secret agent too?" Marcus's stomach twisted into knots. His throat felt tight, like it was closing. He looked down at his shoes, wishing he could disappear. He wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but his voice wouldn't come out. Finally, Mrs. Whitaker sighed dramatically, as if she had wasted enough time. "Sit down, Marcus. Let's hear from someone who can tell us the truth." He walked back to his seat, every step heavier than the last. Whispers and giggles followed him like a shadow. By the time he sat down, tears stung his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Inside, Marcus was screaming. Why don't they believe me? Why is telling the truth so hard? He thought about his dad's words the night before. Never be ashamed of who you are, Marcus. And never hide the truth. People might not believe you, but that doesn't change the facts. But how could he be proud when everyone thought he was a liar? The rest of the day dragged on like a nightmare. Every time he raised his hand to answer a question, he heard someone whisper, "Oh, maybe he's going to say the Pentagon told him the answer," followed by snickers. By the time the final bell rang, Marcus felt invisible. His classmates rushed out, laughing and joking, while he walked slowly, his head down. When he reached home, his mom noticed his red eyes and trembling hands. "Marcus, honey, what happened?" she asked softly. He hesitated. He didn't want to worry her. But the words spilled out like a flood. He told her everything. The humiliation, the laughter, how the teacher called him a liar in front of everyone. His mom's face hardened. She gently cupped his cheeks and said, "Your father needs to hear this." Later that night, his dad came home, wearing his crisp uniform, his ID badge still hanging from his neck. The badge that Marcus knew held so much power and responsibility. His father, Colonel James Walker, was a man of few words, but when Marcus told him what happened, his eyes darkened, not with anger at Marcus, but with a fire that Marcus had only seen a few times. "No one," his father said firmly, "calls my son a liar." Marcus's heart pounded. His dad continued, "Tomorrow, I'm coming to your school, and I'll make sure they know the truth." Marcus wasn't sure if this was going to make things better or worse. But one thing was certain, something big was about to happen. The rest of the day felt like an endless storm that Marcus couldn't escape. Every time he walked down the hallway, he could hear the whispers trailing behind him like ghosts. "Pentagon boy," someone snickered. "Yeah, right, his dad's a spy or something," another voice mocked. "Liar, liar, pants on fire," a group chanted as they burst into laughter. Marcus clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, but he kept walking. If he turned around, if he said anything, they would only laugh harder. In class, even when the teacher moved on to other topics, Marcus could still feel the stares. Some kids whispered behind their hands, while others made exaggerated gestures like holding imaginary walkie-talkies or pretending to be secret agents. Each time, Marcus's stomach sank lower and lower. By lunchtime, his spirit was crushed. Usually, he sat with a small group of friends, sharing sandwiches and talking about video games. But today, the table was empty, or rather, they had chosen a different table. Marcus carried his tray, searching for a friendly face, but all he got were giggles and mocking glances. "Hey, Marcus," one boy called out from across the cafeteria, "when's your dad gonna send the FBI after us?" The table around him erupted in laughter. Marcus lowered his head and walked to an empty table in the corner. He sat alone, staring at his food. He picked at his sandwich, but didn't take a bite. His appetite was gone. The cafeteria felt colder than usual, and even though hundreds of kids were around, he felt completely alone. He thought about lying next time. Maybe he should have just said his dad worked at a store or an office like everyone else's. That would have been easier. No laughter, no mocking, no pain. By the final bell, Marcus walked out of school slowly, dragging his feet. The whispers still followed him outside. He could hear a group of kids behind him chanting, "Pentagon, Pentagon," like it was some kind of joke. When he reached home, he tried to sneak past his mom, hoping she wouldn't notice. But she always noticed. "Marcus," his mom said gently, kneeling down to his level. "What happened, sweetheart? Why are your eyes so red?" He hesitated. Part of him wanted to say, "Nothing," but the pain was too heavy to keep inside. The words tumbled out, broken and shaky. They laughed at me, Mom. The teacher, she called me a liar. Everyone laughed. No one believed me." His mom's expression hardened. Her warm eyes turned cold with anger, not at Marcus, but at the way he had been treated. She hugged him tightly. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. You should never have to feel this way." Marcus buried his face in her shoulder. "Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Maybe I should have just made something up." His mom pulled back and looked him in the eye. "Don't you ever say that. You told the truth, and you should never feel ashamed for telling the truth." Still, Marcus's heart felt heavy. Even his mom's comforting words couldn't erase what had happened. That evening, the sound of the front door opening filled the house. Marcus's dad stepped in, tall and commanding, wearing his crisp military uniform. The Pentagon badge hanging around his neck caught the light, gleaming like proof of everything Marcus had said. "Hey, champ," his dad greeted with a warm smile, but it faded when he saw Marcus's face. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at his mom. She gave him a nod. Taking a deep breath, Marcus told his dad everything. The laughter, the whispers, the teacher shouting "liar" in front of everyone. Every word felt like he was reliving the humiliation all over again. As Marcus spoke, his father's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, not with anger at Marcus, but with a fire that burned with determination. He didn't interrupt, didn't say a word until Marcus was done. When the boy finally finished, his dad stood tall, his voice firm and unshakable. "No one calls my son a liar," he said. "No teacher, no student, no one." Marcus looked up, his heart pounding. "Dad, what are you going to do?" His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'm coming to your school, and I'm going to make sure every single person there knows the truth." Marcus's heart raced. Part of him was relieved, but another part was scared. What if this only made things worse? What if they laughed even more? But when he looked at his dad, standing tall, strong, and unafraid, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. That night, Marcus lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts swirled with a mix of fear and excitement. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. It would be a day no one would forget. The next morning, Marcus walked into class with his head hung so low that his chin nearly touched his chest. His backpack felt heavier than usual, not because of books, but because of the weight of yesterday's humiliation. Every step into that classroom felt like stepping into a battlefield. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, wearing the same smug expression that haunted Marcus all night. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Marcus," she said, raising an eyebrow. "No made-up stories today, understood?" A few students snickered, covering their mouths with their hands. Marcus just nodded quietly and went to his seat without saying a word. Career day continued as planned. Parents came one by one, stepping up to the front to talk about their jobs. A firefighter showed off his helmet and explained how he saved lives. A nurse shared stories about helping patients recover. A business owner spoke about running a local shop. The students clapped politely after each talk, but Marcus barely noticed. He kept his eyes on the clock, watching the hands crawl slower than ever. His stomach twisted with nervous energy. Would his dad really come? And if he did, what would happen? Finally, Mrs. Whitaker called the next parent. The classroom door opened, not with the casual push of a parent carrying props, but with a steady, deliberate movement. The air in the room shifted. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. He had a strong, confident posture, and his gaze swept across the room like he already knew everything happening inside. The fluorescent lights caught the metallic badge clipped to his chest, making it gleam. Students stopped whispering. The room fell into complete silence. Even the kids who had teased Marcus the day before straightened up in their seats. Outside in the hallway, a few teachers peeked in, whispering to each other. "Who is that?" one asked. "He looks important," another replied. The man stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He spoke with a deep, calm voice that carried authority without needing to be loud. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Colonel James Walker. I work at the Pentagon." Marcus's eyes lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. His heart leaped with pride. This wasn't just his dad, it was his hero. Mrs. Whitaker's smirk disappeared instantly. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, "Oh, you're your Marcus's father." Colonel Walker turned his head slowly toward her, his eyes steady. "Yes, I'm Marcus's father," he said with a tone that made every student sit up straighter. "And I'm here to talk about my job, and to clear up a misunderstanding." The class sat frozen, their earlier laughter replaced with wide-eyed curiosity. Colonel Walker stepped to the front of the room, standing tall. He began by introducing himself fully, explaining his role as a senior officer at the Pentagon. He described how the Pentagon wasn't just a building. It was the nerve center of national defense, where crucial decisions were made every single day to protect the country. As he spoke, students leaned forward, hanging on every word. He told them about teamwork, responsibility, and the seriousness of his work, without revealing any sensitive details, of course. His voice was calm, but every sentence carried weight. At one point, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his official ID badge. The room gasped. The badge wasn't a toy or something from a costume store. It was real, with seals, clearances, and an authority no one could fake. He held it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is what your classmate Marcus was talking about yesterday." He wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. All eyes shifted toward Marcus, who sat straighter than ever, his chest swelling with pride. Colonel Walker then turned back to the teacher, his expression serious. "Yesterday, my son was mocked. Instead of being encouraged to speak the truth, he was called a liar. That should never happen, not to my son, and not to any child." Mrs. Whitaker's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The colonel continued, "Children should feel proud to share who they are and where they come from. They should never be ridiculed for telling the truth." A heavy silence filled the room. The students sat still, their earlier whispers replaced with guilt. Even those who laughed the loudest yesterday now stared at their desks. Marcus felt like the weight he'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't the butt of the joke. He was the kid whose dad worked at the Pentagon, the kid who told the truth all along. The colonel finished his talk with a firm but inspiring message. No matter who doubts you, stand by the truth. Because the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to be shown. The class erupted into applause, not out of obligation, but because they were truly impressed. Mrs. Whitaker forced a weak smile. "Thank you, Colonel Walker," she said softly. But everyone could tell, this wasn't over yet. The real lesson had just begun. Colonel James Walker stood tall at the front of the classroom, his commanding presence making even the fidgetiest students sit still. The sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the polished surface of his badge as if to highlight the truth in everything he was about to say. He began to speak in a calm yet authoritative voice, the kind that demanded attention without needing to be raised. "Many of you may have heard of the Pentagon," he said, pacing slowly. "It's not just a building. It's the headquarters of our nation's defense. Every day, thousands of men and women work there to protect this country, to keep your family safe, and to make sure you can come to school without fear. The room was silent. Not a single whisper. Not even the sound of a chair creaking. The students were completely locked in, their earlier mockery forgotten. Colonel Walker continued, explaining in simple terms how his job involved strategy, security, and decision-making that affected millions of lives. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. The respect in his tone spoke louder than any boast ever could. When my team works, he said, we think about all of you. Every child, every parent, every person in this country. Our job isn't easy, but it's necessary. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his ID badge, holding it up for everyone to see. The badge gleamed under the classroom lights, its security seals and holograms impossible to mistake for anything fake. A few students leaned forward, their eyes wide. This, he said, is my clearance badge. It allows me to enter areas most people never see. It's proof of what I do, but it's not the most important thing about my job. The most important thing is integrity, the courage to stand by the truth, even when people doubt you. The kids gasped as he placed the badge on the desk for them to look at. He then took out a small folder with a few safe, non-classified photos from his office. Pictures of the Pentagon from the inside, team photos, and an image of a large conference room where decisions were made. The students stared in awe. "Whoa," whispered a boy in the back. "That's so cool," another murmured. Even the kids who had teased Marcus the most were sitting up straight, their faces filled with amazement. The room had transformed from a place of ridicule to a place of respect. But then, Colonel Walker's expression grew serious. He turned and looked directly at Mrs. Whitaker. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. "Yesterday," he said slowly, "my son stood here and told the truth. Instead of being encouraged, he was mocked, not only by students, but by the very person who was supposed to protect and guide him." Mrs. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her cheeks flushed, and she avoided his gaze. The colonel continued, his tone unwavering. "Children need to feel safe to speak proudly about their families, no matter what their parents do, no matter where they work. Whether someone's father is a janitor, a teacher, a mechanic, or an officer at the Pentagon, that child deserves respect." The room was dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Marcus sat at his desk, his heart swelling with pride. He had never felt so proud to be his father's son. Yesterday, he had been humiliated, crushed under the weight of disbelief. But today, that same classroom that once felt like a prison now felt like a place where the truth had finally been. The students exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of their behavior the day before. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then, with a firm voice, he said, "My son is not a liar, and neither should any child be treated like one when they speak their truth." The room was dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Marcus sat at his desk, his heart swelling with pride. He had never felt so proud to be his father's son. Yesterday, he had been humiliated, crushed under the weight of disbelief. But today, that same classroom that once felt like a prison now felt like a place where the truth had finally been set free. Colonel Walker turned back to the students, his expression softening slightly. "Every one of you has a story. Every one of you comes from a family that matters. Never let anyone make you feel like your story isn't worth telling." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Even the kids who had been the loudest bullies now looked at Marcus with newfound respect. Finally, Colonel Walker gave a small nod. "That's the lesson I wanted to leave you with today. Always speak the truth. And when someone tells their truth, listen." The students broke into applause, genuine and loud. They weren't just clapping because they were supposed to. They were clapping because they felt it. Marcus beamed, his chest rising with pride. His dad wasn't just defending him. He was teaching everyone a lesson they would never forget. Even Mrs. Whitaker, still red-faced, managed to whisper, "Thank you, Colonel Walker." But everyone in that room knew. This wasn't just a thank you moment. This was a turning point. For Marcus, for the class, and maybe even for Mrs. Whitaker herself. When Colonel Walker's final words echoed through the classroom, there was a pause so deep it felt like the world had stopped. Then, almost as if someone had flipped a switch, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite, half-hearted clapping you hear when a presentation ends. It was genuine, loud, and heartfelt. The students who had laughed at Marcus the day before were now clapping the hardest, their eyes wide with admiration. Some even stood up, cheering as if they had just witnessed a hero's speech. Marcus sat frozen in his seat, overwhelmed. Just yesterday, these same kids had mocked him. Today, they were looking at him with respect, some even with awe. The transformation was almost unreal. Mrs. Whitaker, still standing at her desk, looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by shame. She cleared her throat, her voice unsteady as she finally spoke. "Marcus," she began, hesitating. The whole class turned to look at her. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to doubt you. You should be proud of your father, and of yourself." Marcus blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. Slowly, a shy smile spread across his face. "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly. Colonel Walker placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, giving him a proud nod before turning to leave. As he stepped out the door, a wave of students surged toward Marcus. They crowded around him, no longer with mocking grins, but with curious excitement. "Your dad is so cool," one of the boys exclaimed. "Does he really work at the Pentagon?" another asked eagerly. "Can he show us more stuff sometime?" a girl said, eyes sparkling. For the first time in a long while, Marcus didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like the weird kid who told unbelievable stories. He felt like someone who belonged, not because his dad had an important job, but because the truth had finally been seen and respected. The rest of the school day was completely different. Students who once ignored him now wanted to sit with him at lunch. The teasing was gone, replaced by friendly questions and admiration. Even Mrs. Whitaker treated him differently, calling on him more often, speaking to him with a tone that carried respect rather than dismissal. As the final bell rang, Marcus walked out of the classroom with his head held high. He wasn't walking fast to escape the whispers anymore. There were no whispers. There were only smiles and nods. That evening, when Marcus got home, he found his dad sitting in the living room, reading through some papers. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just walked over and wrapped his arms tightly around him. "Thanks for standing up for me, Dad," Marcus said, his voice muffled against his father's chest. Colonel Walker smiled warmly, placing a hand on his son's back. "Always, son. Always. You never have to face the world alone." Marcus looked up at him. "I was so scared they wouldn't believe me. For a while, I even thought maybe I should stop telling the truth." His father knelt down to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Marcus. Never let anyone make you doubt who you are or where you come from. The truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand strong. You stood strong, and that's what matters." That night, Marcus went to bed with a heart full of pride. The memory of yesterday's humiliation no longer hurt. It had transformed into a reminder of how quickly things can change when you have courage and someone who believes in you. The next day at school, Marcus walked in with a confidence he had never felt before. Heads turned as he entered, but instead of giggles, he was greeted with friendly smiles. He even heard someone whisper, "That's the kid whose dad works at the Pentagon." But this time, there was admiration in their voice, not mockery. As for Mrs. Whitaker, she seemed different too. She didn't smirk anymore, and she never mocked a student again. If anything, she became more careful with her words, more encouraging, as if Marcus's father's words had left a mark on her too. Weeks later, Marcus's story spread beyond the classroom. Other teachers heard about what happened, and even parents started talking about the powerful lesson that came from that one career day. Because sometimes it only takes one moment, one powerful, undeniable moment, to change everything. Marcus would never forget it. Neither would his classmates, and certainly not Mrs. Whitaker. From that day on, Marcus didn't just walk into school. He walked in with his head high, shoulders back, and a smile that told the world, "I know who I am. I know my truth." And no one ever doubted him again.